Welcome to Humanizing Leadership. I'm your host, Louise H. Reed. Each week I sit down for 40 minutes and have a brilliant conversation with an expert guest where we discuss topics for next-gen leaders. On today's episode, I am joined by Michelle Osbourne, communications professional and adult educator. The focus of our conversation is how to be an anti-racist. Listen on in and enjoy the show. Michelle, my friend, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you here launching Humanizing Leadership, and especially special to me to be launching this during Black History Month and having you as my first guest. I am open book, no holes barred. I like direct conversation. I like talking about real stuff. And I know you do too. And so I want to ask you, so today's topic of how to be an anti-racist is hard and uncomfortable for many. It's a hard and difficult conversation for many. And so many of us don't have it. Mm-hmm. Why do you think, or why do you personally find that having this hard conversation is so important?
Well, I think this conversation is important because we're in a very historic time, actually, that we're living through, where there is so much out there in terms of information, social media, and it's more in our face now than ever before. And we're going through this kind of change and upheaval of talking about diversity and inclusion and equity that we have never talked about right in front of everyone's face before. So now we have to confront it, really, because we're in a place now where we can't not confront it. There's no way we could ignore it. And so I think now is the opportune time for people to get uncomfortable because we're so used to being comfortable and ignoring it. So now's the time.
I've heard that this is called a moment. And then yesterday, as I was riding on the Peloton, there was this awesome class that I took that was actually filmed on Martin Luther King's birthday, which was just recently. And it was in honor of Martin Luther King. And so there was all sorts of quotes and stories and things shared. And this particular instructor said, let's not keep this a moment. Let's make it a movement. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure she didn't just come up with that. How do we, and when I say we, I mean, how do white people be part of this movement? This is not a Black person's problem.
And, that quote that she said, yeah, I'm for sure I've heard it quite often before too, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, activism doesn't end just because 2020 ended and just because, future years will end, right? It's like literacy. Learning about racism and allyship is like a continuum of learning, right? It doesn't stop just because a movement stops. So I totally agree with that comment. But I think in terms of being ally and understanding, I think the first thing I want to say about it is that it's not just a white-Black thing. I know it's really apparent with white and Black, but there are also other races that I think we can include in this conversation. Mm-hmm. Another thing I want to say is that the first thing is stop using your Black friends as encyclopedias and as Googles. And because the one thing that white people like to do is say, okay, Bill, can you teach me everything? Right. And guess what? Bill might not even be comfortable talking about it. Bill might not even know a lot to share about it. So I think it's not just the Black person's responsibility to be able to educate their white friends. Okay, that is number one. Number two, I think it's about listening more than you speak. Listen. Because you can learn a lot more through listening than when you're always interrupting a conversation and trying to get your 2 cents in. Because if you are a person who is not marginalized and has no idea the effects of how George the George Floyd incident affected them, how Breonna Taylor incident affected them, about how this whole Black Lives Matter movement, because Louise, just by you being white, it means you're privileged. Mm-hmm. Let's just put that out there. You're privileged, hands down. And so even though you can sympathize and try to connect in some way with your friends who are Black or who are people of color, you can never really feel the gravity of what has happened over the past year. So listening more than you speak and not getting defensive. You know, there's people who automatically think, oh, well, they're talking about this, but, you know, I'm not a racist. And this is not about your feelings. This is just about fact, about what's going on. So really making sure that you're not getting defensive and you are paying attention to what the person is saying, who this is really affecting. And then when something goes wrong, making sure that you apologize for it. Don't feel nervous to apologize. I think one of the things about, you know, having friends who are not Black or who are white or of different races who don't understand the gravity or feelings that is going on right now is that they feel embarrassed, or if they make a mistake or if they say something wrong. I am totally open for someone who says, you know what, Michelle, I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea how to respond. I have no idea how to be a better ally. And starting there and admitting that and recognizing your own biases, because let's be honest, everybody has their own bias. You can't tell me you are 100% unbiased, no matter what your race is. And then, of course, remembering that it's not about your feelings. This is about a conversation, about connecting and getting to know and really listening rather than speaking, especially when the situation doesn't affect you like it affects a person of color.
Like holy gems just dropped there. So that was all in response to, you know, allyship and what is it and what does it look like? Mm-hmm. So much goodness there. Those listening, I just want to remind folks that if you want these notes and quotes from the show, including those tips that Michelle just shared on allyship, please subscribe to my list, louisehreed.com. Like, don't take notes, put your pen down, just listen. Yeah. Do what Michelle just said and just listen. We got you on those notes. You also covered like so many layered topics in the tips that you gave. You talked about privilege. So I wanted to maybe share, and I'm sharing this in hopes it's of value to some of my listeners. And then like it was my experience the first time I actually understood what privilege meant. You could have, if you told me, when was it? It's probably about 8 years ago I did this particular exercise. If you told me 9 years ago that I was privileged, I would have said, yes, I am, but I don't think I would have understood it to the level I understand it now. And I still don't understand it to the level that I want to, and I know I need to. But I was doing I was in a training course, and I was doing what's called the privilege walk. And if you're familiar with this, Michelle, I'm sorry, but I'm going to repeat this just for the sake of my listeners, for the listeners who might not know. So we all of us participants in the training stood side by side. We're friends, we're colleagues, we're of different races, different ages, different social backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, but all working at the same company. That was our common thread. And the facilitator asked us a series of questions, things like, how educated our parents were, combined income of our parents, our color, skin color, a variety of different questions that had nothing to do with us, only the situation into which we were born. Mm-hmm. And associated with each of these questions, we either, depending on our answer to the question, which we answered in our minds, but our physical response was we either took 2 steps forward or we took steps backwards. So those who were Black or persons of color would take a step backwards, while the white folk would start to take steps forward. At the end of this exercise, a series of about 20 questions, we were told to look around the room where all our friends were. where we were in relation to our friends. Mm-hmm. And that was our starting point in life. Mm-hmm. I can't even describe the feelings I had. Mm-hmm. That 5-minute exercise, it's like, this is privilege. This is what privilege is.
Oh my God, you gave me goosebumps, because I can only imagine how that exercise felt, and, you know, how it felt to be amongst people and see visually the difference. And in knowing that, in that space, probably you felt a little uncomfortable. Probably everyone felt a little uncomfortable about where they were and their positioning when you did that exercise. And, you know, I think one of the things that when you are a white person is to understand and recognize your privilege. If you don't recognize it, you can't be a part of the conversation. Okay. So until you take the steps, and you can do this in different ways. And I teach this course that talks about being able to start at home with this conversation with your children, and making your home a space where they can see difference, the see cultures, whether it's in their bedroom, they have a map that has different parts of the world, and talking about that, you know, having conversations within your family, maybe starting within your family, and talk about it uncomfortable with them before you approach your friends, because you want to talk to your friends about it, and then talking to your close circle of friends about it. So doing all of these little things starting at home and helps you to address these issues. You know, a really great teacher of diversity named Jane Elliott. I mean, Jane Elliott, everybody needs to Google, everybody needs to watch her. She is the queen. I bow to her at all times. She is a white ally who teaches and has been teaching about diversity for decades. And she is the queen of making your space uncomfortable so you can see your privilege. And so if you get anything from this show, whoever is listening, I need you to Google and watch Jane Elliott. Her work is phenomenal.
I will be Googling her.
Yes.
I read a book by Dr. Robin DiAngelo called White Fragility. And I've watched a TED Talk on hers as well. You're familiar with that, are you?
Absolutely.
Or have heard of it? Yeah. So much work for us to do. And what I'm really grateful for is that there are a lot of resources out there. This isn't like when we had to go to the library and know what we were looking for, pull out the card catalog. So any millennials out there won't even know what a card catalog is.
So cool.
Right?
Oh my God, I feel so old.
Right? You'd have to find the librarian and kind of give some ideas to what you were looking for, and they would have to know what you were looking for.
And it was on paper too, right? How did they keep that up? I don't know.
I know. We don't have that now. So there are no excuses. While it might be difficult for us to think that we can't avoid the conversation now, whereas in the past we were putting our head in the sand. We can't do that now. But also it means that it's opportunity, because the same thing that's bringing this to us and putting it into our face and making it, hello, you have to pay attention. That same tool can also help us.
I absolutely agree.
I also love, and I've not thought about it like this before, I love how you talked about what you teach, in that you try to make it somewhat safer to have these conversations and practice these conversations in greater safety, like by starting in your home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important, because let's be honest, we know this is an uncomfortable conversation, right? And I'm sure I have white friends who want to ask me all kinds of questions, but don't know how to bring it up. Luckily, the friends that I have who are white are allies, and they listen. Mm-hmm. They want to understand, they want to know, and they do the work to do that. And for those who don't do the work, a lot of the time it's a fad, right? Let's be honest, you can be thought of as a really big fad right now, right? I was marching and I want to be part of history, and Jamal is my friend and we're going to do. And so it can be seen as the new black. I always say allyship is the new black right now for some people, right? And so I think a safe space is starting at home with your family, creating a space where it is diverse. Like if I ask you, Louise, look at your home, how diverse is it for your kids to see? Is it just what you're doing, or is there things in it? And I'm not saying, all of a sudden change all of the decor in your home with posters everywhere and have anti-racist posters on every wall. I'm not saying that as well, but I'm just saying, look at your environment, and that includes your friends, to be able to start this conversation and be comfortable with it. And I always encourage people to start when kids are really young, puzzles that are diverse, games that are diverse, crafts that are diverse, books that are diverse. My daughter's books are hugely diverse because I want her to recognize that there's difference and talk about inclusion and equity. And so when we bring this to this safe space, it's easier for us to go out and say, Michelle, I want to have this conversation. It's really uncomfortable for me, but I want to know how to be a better ally. So I want to have this conversation. I might have some biases. I might have some things that I don't recognize. And I respect that so much, rather than someone saying, I just don't want to talk about this because it's really a non-issue. And I've had people come up and say, why are we still talking about race? Because it's still a problem.
Wow.
A big problem.
If you're in a position of privilege, you're not the one to ever say if it's an issue or not. It's not your place.
Oh my God. Exactly, Louise. I couldn't have said it better myself. And that's privilege. That's privilege. Right. When you're saying that it's not an issue, that's privilege.
Right. Absolutely. So if you're someone if you hear that and you recognize that you've heard yourself saying that, don't worry. Like now when you know better, you can do better.
Absolutely.
So interesting that you talk as well about kids and bringing these kinds of conversations to your kids and starting young. There are more children's books on these types of things now than ever before. Fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I've actually started building children's books into my leadership training.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an amazing way to do it.
And there's so many great books on inclusion. And that's what the leaders that I'm working with, because, the folks who I'm training, mid-30s and higher, not all of them have grown up with mums who have had diverse books read or reading diverse books to their children. They're not grown up in that kind of environment. So that's the simplicity with which we really need to be taking this too. Speaking of books, I've just been I love reading, and I've just been devouring any kind of book that I can get my hands on in relation to this topic, which on one hand feels shameful. I'm just going to say it. It's like, oh, now it's time to start reading all these books. So there's definitely.
Well, you want to know what, Louise? I don't think you should feel shameful about it, because I think that you don't know what you don't know. And if you're in an environment where where you haven't had to face all of these things, you're not necessarily going to tackle them. Guess what? I didn't grow up with any diverse books ever, because there wasn't any, or maybe there was one or two. But so even now I am still learning. Just because I'm a Black person, right, it doesn't mean that I know it all. There's things that people teach me all the time. Guess what? I didn't go to school to talk about this subject and to teach about racism and diverse. I didn't go to school. This is all life experience and what other people have told me. So I think it's commendable that you're actually taking steps now rather than ignoring it and pretending it's not there.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. And along the same lines as what you were saying a moment ago, one of my 15-year-olds is reading this book alongside me. It's this one here, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man by Emmanuel Acho. And I'm bringing this up because he's talking about all sorts of things. And he's got some great videos as well, which are fantastic. He's talking about, the section I'm reading about now is about cultural appropriation. And in the book, he says, the goal of sounding the alarm about cultural appropriation is not to stop anyone, white people included, from celebrating Black culture. The key is to celebrate it as Black culture, not to take it as your own.
Oh my God, that is so, so powerful. And even the subject of cultural appropriation is a tough subject. It's an uncomfortable subject all in itself. And, first I want to say all of these points of view are my own, because there could be some people of color who don't think what I think. And specifically in the area of cultural appropriation, there's certain things that I think are cultural appropriation, and there's some things that I don't. And then I have conversations with friends who are like, why don't you think that's cultural appropriation? So all of us have our own perception or ideas or outlooks on what we think cultural appropriation is. There's some things that are obvious and some things that are not so obvious. But I think he really, that quote fits perfectly with what cultural appropriation is.
So what you just said there is, I know that there'll be white folks listening, who then that scares them to say, well, you don't know what it is. How are we supposed to know what it is? And it scares us. That's our problem. That's our problem that I realize we have to deal with. But the reality is that puts us even further. I feel like that puts us even further back. How do we continue then, despite whichever topic we're talking about here, whether we're talking about biases, talking about privilege, talking about cultural appropriation, all of which might send any individual who is not Black or a person of color, might send them into the corner of, denial and just wanting to put the head in the sand. Mm-hmm. How do we stand on that space of discomfort? How do we do that?
You know what? I think the first thing to keep in mind and to really be open about is that it is uncomfortable, and actually saying it. Say, you know what? This is uncomfortable for me right now, and I don't know anything, or I'm still confused about some things. And saying, if there's something that you find is cultural appropriation, if there's something that I said that is culturally inappropriate, please call me out on it, because I'm still learning. Guess what? We're all still learning. And if you have a Black friend who acts like they know it all, then there's an issue in that in itself, because there is nobody who knows it all. I think we are all expressing our own opinions. And yes, it can be difficult. It's interesting that you were just like, oh my God, if you don't know, how am I supposed to know what's culturally inappropriate or not? And I think it really depends on, the conversations that you're having with your friends, whether it's a colleague, whether it's whoever, in terms of being safe to express how you feel, how uncomfortable it is, and what you know and what you don't know. But I don't know if there's any one way for me to say, this is the list of culturally inappropriate things. Now, there's some really big things that are obvious and some things that are not so obvious, but I don't think there's a way that I can say, I'm going to refer you to this person or this list so Yeah, no, there's no way.
We're looking for simple answers, right? Yeah, when there's confusion, we're looking for clarity. It's kind of like during this period of COVID, people have been looking for certainty when there is no certainties. So, as you were sharing that answer, I'm just kind of going back to even some of the things that you were saying earlier about allyship. You had been talking about listening more than you speak. not getting defensive, that's not about your feelings, meaning I'm saying the majority, we're not even the majority in the world. Like, white people aren't even the majority in the world. But anyway, we're called the majority. We call ourselves the majority.
Oh, how interesting that is. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, and to be really frank and honest, the only reason that, like, these are uncomfortable topics, but the reason that this is comfortable for me, if I can use the word comfortable, well, because I am comfortable, is because I'm comfortable with you and how you've opened up and made yourself willing to share this space for the purpose of helping, supporting, and educating others. And, you know, so I was thinking about some of those things that you said, and then I was thinking about reading and learning, and also looking around at our friends. You mentioned that as well. Who is in our friend circle? If we look around our workplace, who's in our work circle? Mm-hmm. And I think even if we just start doing a little bit of all those things, start reading a little more, listening a little more, learning a little more, having a little more diversity in the people around us, we even then, those little steps across a few different areas, I think will together start to create different perspectives in oneself. And
I think that, you know, especially with younger people, and I'm talking about, let's say, preteens and teens and stuff like that, there's so many different ways that you can bring diversity or talk about the diversity in their lives without sitting down with them and saying, let's talk about diversity. Let's have uncomfortable conversations about race. You know, pop culture, current events, celebrities, sports stars, musicians. There's a multitude of ways that you can use those different tools, quote unquote, to have a conversation about race and allyship and injustices and inclusion. I think it's really interesting that you said your son is reading that book, and I would really, I would love it if you could have a conversation with him after you both finish reading it, because it will be an interesting one. And I think, your son is a teenager at this point, right?
Yeah, he's 15.
Oh, that's an interesting age to be talking about this and to be living through what's going on right now, because he's going to be a big part of the future to either be a part of the solution or a part of the problem. Big step. So I think it's really interesting that he's reading this. But, you know, I think what people should really hone in on and recognize is that it doesn't have to be a formal, educated, sit down, read a book conversation, but there's all of these things going on around us that can start the conversation through different things. You know, I think about the guy in football who during Kaepernick. And I use him as an example for my branding practice as well, because I think it's brilliant. But, you know, when kids see that and having that conversation, and mom, why would he do that? And, you know, he is so unfaithful, and that is a perfect time to have a conversation and bring it up. And the conversation may be uncomfortable. The conversation might cause conflict, but how do you grow unless you have an uncomfortable conversation? You can't. It's impossible. You can't change without uncomfortable conversations, because that's what change is. It's uncomfortable. And the sooner you start, the better it will be in the long run for that person being part of the solution, not the problem.
Yeah, growth and comfort don't live in the same house. That's for sure.
Not at all. Absolutely not.
I know you brought up a sports example, and sports, I think, are quite easy to look to. Cleveland Indians baseball team. I think they just got rid of they just called it the Cleveland Baseball Club now or something like that, but that was just last year. Yeah. Wow. I mean, so to your point, the stuff happening all around us, look through the paper, look through the paper.
Current events are your best teachers.
Yeah, current events are the best teachers. Absolutely. I wanted to ask a really specific workplace question because this is something that I've dealt with a lot, and I'm interested in your perspective on this. So when I've worked with a lot of colleagues over the years, I often hear from white leaders. This is not all white leaders, because just like you were saying, you're speaking from your perspective. As a white person, I don't speak on the behalf of all white people. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my own experiences. And we're talking about recruiting and making sure that we're inclusive in our approach. And they say, I'm not racist. I don't see color. When I'm hiring, I hire the best person for the job. What's your reaction to this?
I think that it's impossible not to see color, as much as we want to say that. For you, it might ring true. But me being in HR in my past as well, I've seen people say that, but I know there's bias. That is kind of saying, how do I want to express this? Like, we're all one and we should never see color. In fact, you should see color because you can't address the things that are going on unless you do. The biggest thing about it is understanding how to use your voice or take action so that that person being that specific color or specific race is not a determinant on their ability to do things. So I think you can't be blind to the fact that you don't see a color in front of you, but just to recognize that that shouldn't be the deciding factor on if they are going to be the successful candidate or the person who gets the job, anything like that. But I think I would refrain from that. Because I think it's hard. I think it's hard to say that you ignore it.
I think it's almost like you're ignoring a part of the person. It pains me every time I hear it, and I was just wanting to get your perspective on that. And something that I'm sure you're aware of, want to point out to listeners in case they're not. There are some assessments that are free through Harvard. They're the implicit bias tests. Are they perfect? Nope. But are they a tool? They are one of the many tools available to help just get your thinking expanded, right? And so I wanted to share that. I wanted to share this with you because I find it interesting and, well, funny, not really funny, but I took a variety of these tests. So they have different tests for to test your, they don't call it level of racism or where you are on the continuum, but essentially to do with race, sexual orientation, and a variety of other factors that we tend to have strong biases within. Mm-hmm. Turns out, according to these assessments, I'm biased towards the minority. And I was like, duh! I've like over-rotated. It's like, I can't get, yeah. So we're just looking, I just thought that, yeah, you might get a kick out of that. But it really is a great tool to at least open your eyes to it. And I think if you're someone who has said, I don't see color, it's a really good signal that you have a bias there. I really Absolutely. Think it's a signal. It's an opportunity for learning. 100%. Again, wanted to just share that in case there's someone, not for shaming, but for there's another opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I have one final question for you.
Okay.
So in honor of Black History Month, in honor of it just recently having been Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, if you had the opportunity to ask him one question, what would it be?
Oh my God, that's one of the hardest questions on the planet I've ever been asked. If I had one question to ask him, I think I would ask him, how do you think we're doing now? Are we living up to what you set out as a dream, or are we going backwards? How do you think we're doing now? And I'm not sure how he would respond. I'm not sure. I think he would. I'm not sure how he would respond, but I would really like him to. I would really like to get his perspective on how he thinks we're doing now.
And with that, I want to say that having known you for, many years.
Yeah, we won't tell everybody.
Many years.
It doesn't matter. We already know how old I am, so it's a long time.
Yeah, it's a long time. I also totally fine with my age. It's just like trying to my older brain trying to do the math. I want to say that I think you're doing great now. I'm so proud to know you and to share this space with you, and to see what more greatness is coming for you. One of the things I said, that was the last question. It's not going to be my last question, because one of the things I just wanted for you to just share with us is about some of the things that you've got going on now and very in the very near future. The listeners have heard your bio at the beginning, but what's next for you, Michelle?
Well, of course, I'm the creative director of Project Femme Noir, which is a platform that showcases women of color living in Quebec. That started last year, February 2020, Black History Month. And continuing on with that, I am in the process of making it a not-for-profit. So where people, women of color in Quebec, can network and learn and connect with each other in safe spaces. So it's going beyond just the photo series. And then what is more recently coming up is my own platform, Michelle Osbourne and Company, which is a communications studio that helps marginalized women, communities, non-binary persons build socially conscious brands. And it's work that I have been doing for the last few years, more for community organizations and corporations. I've been in communications for well over a decade. And more recently, I have seen that, just like your new branding, your new platform about humanizing leadership, I think that the books out there now about business and about success are riddled with privilege and biases. And so what I'm trying to do with this platform is helping people create businesses through communications tools, branding, and using their lived experiences as superpower rather than conforming and trying to be put in a box so they look like and act like everybody else. Because what people don't realize is their lived experience as a Black person, as a fat person, as a queer person, as a person with a neurodivergent, all of those things, people are looking for you. And you think you have to conform and be like everybody else when people are starved for connection, for someone that they can connect with. And so I am helping marginalized communities build their brands so they can be themselves and stand out. That's it.
Yes, you're marvelous. And you, my friend, are a beautiful example of what humanizing leadership is all about. Thank you so much for taking this time to share with me and my listeners. And I wish you so much luck in all those endeavors, and can't wait to have you on the show next year and hear what's been on the go. You've been listening to Humanizing Leadership with Louise H. Reed, along with today's guest, Michelle Osbourne. You'll find links to her work and website in the show notes on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, as well as in today's notes and quotes, which you can get by subscribing to my email list at www.louisehreed.com. Podcast theme music is from Ben Sound. Thank you so much to them. And of course, thanks to you for listening. If you've enjoyed today's show, please tell a friend and subscribe. I also invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. Finally, a special thanks to Contact Talk Radio Network and my podcast production team, Cameron Steele and Jay Andrews. See you all next week. Bye, friends.